Daphne, welcome so much to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Always excited when the young people reach out to me. So you saw one of my TikTok videos based on law and you thought you could add a lot to this. You're a first year law student. You've already set yourself up with a job, which is awesome. You've got a really cool story in leadership and stuff. Not before we get into that, as we get into that, do you want to tell us like what finishing high school was like for you and the pressures you were feeling and what you ended up deciding to do?
So finishing high school for me was, I guess, different to what I expected. You know, I graduated last year, so a lot of it was in COVID. Yeah. A lot of the time I was, wondering what I would do post high school. Like I was very much interested in the humanities. I was involved in debating and mooting and that type of thing. So, I considered arts, I considered law, I considered, journalism, but I just ended up going with law because it just seemed like the best fit. And I was like, I'm just going to give it a go. I was, I guess, involved in extracurriculars. I was debating and public speaking leader at in high school. But yeah, I definitely think it was overall very different to what I expected. I wasn't able to spend as much time at school with my friends. And a lot of it, more than I wanted it to be, was like online. So yeah. Yeah.
And so you mentioned you just kind of went into law. Obviously there's a lot of stigma behind law. It's very high status. It makes you, I guess, I see a lot of people jumping into law when they shouldn't be, but what you've done is really cool is you've actually got a job while you're studying within the law industry. So that way you get to taste it, you get to try it. So you can see, is this right for me? And you'll be able to your resume. So by the time you graduate, you'll have like 3-4 years experience, plus you'll have your degree on top of that, which is so much more powerful than someone who's just done a degree.
Yeah, I think that was driven by, I guess, the pressure to stand out because, a lot of the time you are compared against many different candidates. And so for the past 8 months or so, I've been working at a personal injury law firm. I think the benefit to it was actually, getting a taste of the personal injury space, finding out that it wasn't really the place where I wanted to work in the long term. But at the end of the day, I think it provided me with a lot of experience, valuable connections. And on top of that as well, I found that it actually complemented my degree, particularly, I started working there in term 1 and then I learned about torts in term 2, which, is very much like personal injury, and it all started making sense to me a lot more. So I think those were the benefits of, starting to work quite early in my degree.
Well, that's where I really disagree with a lot of the way university teaches. Like that is so good to have the theory from university and then actually put it in practice. Yeah. At work, like I'm sure you heard the theory, you kind of understood it, but then when you actually did it at work, you're like, oh, now I get it. I see how it applies in the real world scenario. And that's what I feel like a lot of education is missing.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes I sit there in class and I'm like, okay, I honestly didn't understand like how some things would apply like in the real world. Like I'd have to sit there and ask a lot of questions about, okay, but what would this look like in practice? Like what are the actual steps that you'd have to, take to do this particular thing? I think while theory is very interesting, I think particularly talking about, torts, we learned a lot about, the whole system in general, the I guess thinking behind the system. But a lot of the time it wasn't actually the practical stuff that I was actually doing at the firm. So it was helpful to do both. But, if you're not actually working at the same time, it's like you're only really getting the theory stuff until you actually put yourself out there and, start working and getting the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. That's where it really that's where the rubber hits the road, when you actually start doing it. And it's like, the problem is if you wait 4 years, you do a 5-year degree and then you go out and do it, it's like, it's too late. You've forgotten a lot of it. And so that's why I am really a big fan of if you can, I know it's difficult to get a job in your industry while you're studying because there's so many benefits. You mentioned now it's not really what I want to do in this particular area of law. That's great because now you know what you don't want to do and you can choose something else. So even if you go, I did something and it's not what I want to do, that's equally as good as figuring out if it is what you want to do.
Yeah, definitely. And now I'm about to, enter into the litigation space. And, when I first got the job, I wasn't really specifically sure what that actually meant. But I think regardless, it's a new area to kind of explore. It's very much to do with court proceedings, going to court, dealing with disputes. So I think it'll be quite interesting to go into the space, see if I like it. I mean, if I don't, you can always just go and try something new on top of that. So,
well, that's what I think every young person should be doing. It doesn't matter what industry, whatever you want to do with your life, you should be trying and tasting as many things as you can. So if you know you want to go to law, well, let's try and taste every aspect of law so I can figure out which one aligns with me more, so I can kind of tailor my degree and tailor what I want to do with my life towards something that I would enjoy a bit more, versus being stuck in, what are you doing, public liability right now?
I was doing personal injury, but now I'm doing litigation.
Yeah. And so you can and you might not like that, and you switch to something else, and you've got time to do that. And so that's where it's like, when we talk about university, it's like, my opinion is, if you're going to go to university, do everything you can so you come out with a degree, internships, jobs, a connection, friendships. But I'm seeing a lot of people who are just getting their degree. They have no friends, no connections. They don't really do much else. Half of their degree has been off campus, sorry. Yeah. Even before COVID, a lot of it was on campus. But actually, we'll do a little bit of a derail here. I kind of mentioned it to you off camera before, but like, how has university been for you? Because your first year, it's 2021, which means you've, in Sydney, we've just kind of got out of 6 months of COVID. Yeah. So like over 50% of your degree has been online. What's that experience been like?
It's been very different to what I expected. I thought, okay, like I've graduated high school. Like there's none of I'll no longer need to like self-isolate or anything. I'll no longer need to do uni from home. Like I'll be able to go out. I'll be able to, meet people. Yeah. And, that all changed in I think it was June, July this year. I was quite lucky though, because when I first started in February, because, we do trimesters at UNSW, so we start in February. And, I was lucky to have a group of friends that I met and that we kind of met up with when we could outside of COVID. But at the same time, online learning, it's so difficult to pay attention. It's so difficult to actually, process the content and actually understand things, because it's so different to when you're online. It's in person, sorry. It's so different to when you're in person. Yeah. And so as we're saying, it's just boring PowerPoints. It's it's almost easy to go watch YouTubes. And that's where I was saying to you before, one of the 3 people failed to finish a degree in Australia because they drop out, they switch or whatever it is. And if that was a business model, that would be considered a failed business. But for some reason, people just don't view university that way. And I think they really haven't innovated to keep you engaged online. Like you were mentioning, they were just playing replay videos from last year. Yeah, for law at least, my lectures have just been the videos that they pre-recorded for last year's cohort, which were also online. So we've just been watching those and then having live tutorials. But again, it's you kind of feel robbed, because you're still paying the same fees.
You're paying
and you're getting
15,
recorded videos.
15, 20 grand a year for recorded videos, which you could just go watch on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's and that's kind of where I feel like they're just not innovating in the space. They're not trying to keep young people engaged. They don't understand, us watching videos is not a privilege. They're you can watch it from the comfort of your own home. We've been able to do that since we were 10 years old. Mm-hmm. That's not something we're excited about. Just like you're excited to enter the real world. You're excited to meet people. You're excited to go out on campus and I guess separate yourself from high school. But right now it almost feels a little bit the same. Yeah.
And I feel a part of that as well, they, a lot of, at least my lecturers are quite old. Yeah. And they're not really speaking to young people. They're not really consulting with us and asking us what do we want? Is this working for us? Getting feedback. We, at least at my university, we give feedback at the end of the year, but they're not really consistently doing it. And if they were to do that, they could actually, hear about our experiences and genuinely listen about, how we've been feeling. It's a bit late now because we're at the end of the year, but if they had actually spoken to us and, asked us what we think, asked us, if for suggestions on how we can improve things, because evidently it's not the ideal situation. It's not the best way that the majority of us learn. So actually taking on feedback and speaking to the young people that they're teaching would be quite helpful.
Well, there's actually an interesting experiment that was done that I think it's based on the theory of mind. And it's basically they had children below the age of 5. And they had them in a room and they said, here's a box of M&Ms. They said, what do you think's inside this box of M&Ms? And of course they all said M&Ms. And then they opened it up and they're like, oh, it's a box of pencils. And then they said, we're going to do the exact same thing to the kids next door. What do you think they're going to say? Oh, they're going to say pencils. They couldn't comprehend that the kids next door are going to make the same mistakes that they made. And we're kind of seeing that in a lot with academics. These professors are so disconnected from what it was like to learn the content in the first place because they learnt it 40 years ago. They can't remember what it was like to learn it. They've been teaching it for 30, 40 years. And so they're also very disconnected to younger people. And I do think they need to be, you know, when I teach younger people, I wrap it up in stories. I use analogies. I make it as engaging as possible. We do constant stretch breaks. We do games and everything when we're teaching young people, because that's how you need to do it. You know, we live in an instant gratification society. Young people struggle to sit down for 2 hours to watch a PowerPoint lecture. Like, man, that's hard.
Yeah.
That's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely, I agree with you. And I think a lot more needs to be done. I just think in general, like regardless whether it's like academics, whether it's like, you know, anything, if they're making decisions that, you know, impact on how we learn or impact on our lives, they should really be listening to us and consulting with us. Yeah,
I think they need to be putting, and this is just my opinion, I think teachers, professors, anyone who's professors, anyone who's teaching younger people need to be putting more work on their presentation skills and their engaging skills and how to deliver content than just knowing the content. Knowing the content's only half. You need to also be a great presenter.
Yeah.
And then they're just bringing in people who are like, you know, who have been in the space for a long time and they're highly qualified and they know all the content, but that doesn't mean they can deliver it.
Yeah.
Like I remember in economics in year 12 for me, in year 12 economics, we were just highlighting from a textbook. And it was the most boring thing. I learned very little. The year before, we were doing like Q&As all the time. We were like always bouncing off and asking questions. And yeah, I think it's really worrying because, I mean, I don't, similar to you, I think a lot of people don't learn that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, look, I will admit though, I think it is a little bit harder for, you know, professors and lecturers and tutors to do this, like to, I guess, be more engaging online.
Oh my God.
Because
it's so hard.
Yeah, like in half of my tutorials, everybody has their cameras, actually all of them actually, everybody has their camera switched off. Nobody like speaks unless they're actually spoken to.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's just dead silent. Like aside from law, in law we get marked for class participation. So it's a little bit more, like everyone needs to put their hand up, everyone needs to like speak to get marks. But particularly, you know, I do polls and IELTS, a double degree. And like in that degree, like it's just dead silent most of the time. It's the same like two people talking. And I sometimes feel sorry for my tutors and lecturers because they can't get anyone. Yeah.
I think I was more meaning in the context of in person.
In person, yeah.
But virtual's brutal. Like me and my mate were we were getting Q&A'd on a session the other day and no one had the cameras on. I was like, can you just put your cameras on so I can see who I'm talking to? It was like super depressing and it was good, but like just put your camera on. Yeah. And I've done a lot of virtual presentations. I hate them. Yeah. Like I'm so over them. There's no energy. And Empower You, this program I help run, we do a whole section on communication. And we do, there's a little bit of a spoiler here, but we say if you had a speaker and a listener, what percentage of responsibility does the speaker and the listener have when it comes to communication? Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Is it 70-30? Whatever it is. And then the plot twist, of course, is it's 100%. You know, if you want to have a good communication, the speaker needs to be giving 100% energy and communication skills, and the listener needs to be giving 100%. That's where effective communication happens. Yeah. So if you've got kids who are half on their phone with their screens off, of course, it's going to be really ineffective communication.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, you know, in high school, you mentioned you did this leadership program thing. Do you want to tell us a little bit what you were doing in high school and how you managed to land a job like as a first year? Yeah. Because that's obviously something a lot of people would love to achieve.
So as I mentioned earlier, in like year 9 and 10, I wasn't like the best student. I wasn't the most active. I was getting average grades. I was just, you know, very much just focused on like friends and just like, you know, being a kid. It was only really in year 11 that I started to kind of realize, you know, I have to, you know, get myself together. I have to, you know, start getting involved in things. And so I started getting involved in extracurriculars at school, first of all. So, you know, I did things such as, you know, debating, public speaking, mooting, mock trial. They were just things I found interesting and I, you know, started to do. There were a few other things that I just tried and didn't really like sport and stuff. I just wasn't very good at it. So, you know, I just dropped those things. Alongside that, I also did, you know, Girl Guides outside of school. So a lot of that was just very much, you know, doing activities with people, giving back to the community, volunteer work and whatnot. And then it was in year 11 that I, you know, had been involved a little bit and I decided, you know, I saw this UNICEF Young Ambassador program come up and I was like, you know what, I'm going to just apply for it. I'll just see how I go. Like I wasn't expecting to get it at all. But it just looked like a cool thing to try. So I was kind of just like on the lookout for any opportunities to explore because I just wanted to, I guess, work out where I was going, like what I was interested in, what I wanted to do after high school. So I thought it would give me a little bit of a taster. So
The more of a holistic idea of what you want to do.
yeah, because it was very much involved in advocacy, in child rights, in I guess meeting with children and young people, which was something that I already enjoyed doing quite a lot. So I just decided to apply, and all I had was just the extracurriculars I did at school. I did a little bit of Girl Guides, and like I said, I was just, I guess, passionate about trying something new and actually meeting with children and young people, because I thought they should be heard, and I thought that a lot of the time our politicians, our leaders, weren't really working in our best interests, because
it definitely feels right now that there's a huge disconnect between the politicians and young people. They just have no idea the difficulties young people are going through. They have no idea how we communicate and think, their messaging. I do a lot of stuff around consent and sexual assault. I've got a whole separate podcast on that, but I don't even remember they released this milkshake video.
Yeah.
And it was just horrendous. It was oh my God, how do you hit the mark? How do you miss the mark so badly?
It was just, I think the major issue here, particularly with that consent video, was just the fact that they don't consult with young people. They don't actually listen to us. They don't listen to what we have to say. If they actually took the time to do that, and if they actually listened instead of just, pretending to listen to what we had to say, they would understand a little bit more how we think, how we communicate, what we want to see. Because at the end of the day, if they don't do that, it's just a waste of time. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources, like that milkshake video.
And it's just embarrassing.
Exactly.
It's so embarrassing. The Australian government, to give a bit of clarity to anyone who doesn't know, they released a milkshake video, which was supposed to be a metaphor for consent. And it was this super cringy video. The acting was bad. The direction was bad. The messaging was bad. They used a milkshake as a metaphor for sex. And it was just really poorly done and super embarrassing. And I think I spent 2.5 million on it or something. Yeah. And I'm 2.5 million, do you know what you could do with that money? Our podcast, my sexual assault podcast, is at over 80 million views across TikTok, and we've had heaps of downloads. We've provided education all around the world on this space, and I think it cost me $2,000 to put together. I haven't made any money from it. It's imagine what people could do with millions of dollars if instead of, if they actually consulted young people and listened to them. Because I think what you said, they're pretending to listen. I do think they often pretend to listen.
And I honestly think I've watched a few videos from that podcast, and I think a lot of the time people are getting their education from that podcast, because I've spoken to a lot of my friends, and I have a similar experience myself where consent wasn't really taught at all.
No, not at all.
It was just skimmed over, and I went to a Catholic independent school, so we weren't taught about practically anything. I definitely think a lot more needs to be done, and I think that I think that the I forgot his name,
Brett.
Yeah. He actually spoke at my school, and I remember
everyone says that,
I remember sitting there and listening to him, and for the first time I felt like somebody actually understood my experiences. He spoke about, I still remember the defense that he taught us. And he was eyes, nose, throat, and then he was groin, foot, how to defend ourselves against, and anytime I've actually felt in danger, anytime I've been catcalled or anything like that, because I think, it's not an uncommon occurrence, particularly around young women, and it happens to us a lot. And I think that has just stuck in my head. And anytime I felt, okay, there's a car that I see, it's driving really slowly. I've always just thought about that at the back of my mind. So I think he's awesome. And honestly, every young person should have the ability to listen to him.
Well, that's what the podcast does.
Yeah.
That's why he did it. And it's funny because to clarify, most people would know, but I've got my sexual assault podcast. Brent is the expert on that. He speaks at schools. And so when he came to your school, it's all girls school, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he does the all girls presentation, but for schools that are mixed, he does separate presentations for the boys and girls. Completely different content really. We didn't learn self-defense. And so I remember at the bus stop afterwards, the girls were grab my arm. And they were teaching a skill where they learned how to untwist it. They grab their wrist and they're and they were saying the groin, whatever. I'm not sure what it is, but I think he's a great guy. And to clarify for the consent thing, a lot of people are saying, consent, it's simple. Why do we need to be taught it and stuff? It's actually not simple. It's very multi-layered and multifaceted when there's alcohol involved, when there's different ages involved. There's so many variables, manipulation, coercion, all this different stuff. it's actually quite complicated. And that's why we did like an 8-hour podcast. And that's why important, people like him should be coming in. And, we've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole here, but I do think, the government is trying to include more stuff in schools, but I just don't know if they can do it well. I can't see people actually learning from teachers about consent. Like if a teacher,
it's too awkward.
It's
also quite awkward having those discussions with teachers. Like from my experience, I'd rather have someone like him come in and speak to me because he's got so much experience and he's lively. He connected with us really well.
Phenomenal presenter. Phenomenal. When he speaks with the boys, because it's much tougher to speak with the boys. With the girls, he's coming in. He's like, ladies, he's here. I'm a man. I've analyzed a lot of men. I'm going to teach you what, how they think and all this stuff. With the boys, he comes in. He goes, look, boys, you're in the age group we're in now. We are most likely to commit a sexual crime. So it's a really intense conversation. And so what he does is he gets you laughing beforehand. He cracks a bunch of jokes. Yeah. He tells all these stories. So 30 minutes in, you're super comfortable with him. So now he hits you with the heavy stuff, and you're like, man, you're really listening. His presentation was super impactful.
Yeah.
And I just can't see a teacher doing, maybe you've had specific teachers like him who are trained, but I've started teaching consent at schools as well. And, I've done the whole podcast. I've studied it. I've learned all the laws and, and a lot about it. And I talk with a lot of people about it. Now I just meet people and they tell me their stories because I've got the podcast naturally. And I put a lot of work into it, and it's a difficult conversation to have, but it needs to be had. And as much as I love to see the government taking action and they're trying to put it in the education system, I'm not sure it'll be effective. You can't just have a consent class, really. You need to have a specific teacher.
To teach it, yeah. And I also think, it needs to be taught from, a much younger age as well.
Yeah.
And from my experiences, while I haven't had any specific experiences in relation, I've heard a lot of friends, and I've, been there while a lot of friends have gone through really difficult situations. And it's been, from year 8 was the earliest, story I ever heard about, one of my friends who, there was an incident that happened on a train on the way to school. And I think from such a young age, it was the first time I'd ever heard of something like that. It was the first time I'd ever, I didn't even think I didn't even think that would be possible at such a young age. It wasn't what I was thinking about at all. But I think if we were actually taught, if we had, even spoken to him earlier, or if we were taught about it earlier, or taught about what to actually do, it would have been so much more helpful. So much more helpful.
Yeah, it's removing a lot of the stigma behind it. And I think it's coming, but we'll see what happens.
We'll see.
On this topic, how did you, because a big part of this, the tagline of this podcast is teaching practical life skills we should have learned in school. As someone who only just graduated last year, how did you feel about school? Do you think a lot of what you learned wasn't that relevant? Do you wish you learned other skills? What would you love to have included in your education?
Well, I think a big one was definitely education around consent. Also, what to do if, you are in a situation of sexual assault or harassment, what to do if, you're even catcalled or feel like, because I feel like those are a far more common thing that happened to particularly myself and a lot of my friends. What to do in those situations. I would also say, Paul Dillon was another person who came and spoke to us, and he taught us a lot about, what to do if there are drugs and alcohol involved, and how to handle situations where, you may need to call an ambulance. And he was super, super informative. And he also took a really realistic stance on it, because instead of telling us, don't drink, don't do drugs, they're bad for you, don't do that. He was actually he acknowledged that, many of us, before we turn 18 have, a few drinks now and then. And he acknowledged that, if you're going to do these things, this is what you have to do to keep safe. This is what you have to do to keep your friends safe. Because if you're not actually taught about those things, what are you going to do if you end up in a situation like that?
That's it.
You haven't been taught it.
And the education system really focuses on just wear contraception. It's okay, but what happens if we don't and we get put in a situation? What happens in this? Okay, just don't do drugs. It's that's unrealistic. A lot of people might not do drugs, but a lot of people are going to do drugs, or they're going to be in situations where their friends have done drugs or something. And it's you can't just sweep it under the rug. You got to stop hiding it. It's you got to be realistic. What is stuff that people are going to go through? And that's where bringing in, I learned a lot from people who came in outside of the school, which is sad. Shouldn't that be included within your education? You don't have to bring in outsiders like Paul and Brent, who I know Paul as well. He does drugs. He's coming on the podcast, and Brent does sexual assault. But I think that's really important. And I do agree. I think there should be more drug education in this education system. Anything else?
I'd also say, you mentioned your going to kind of introduce this as well, but things such as like changing tires and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what I would do if I was ever in that situation. On top of that, like if I was ever like, I don't drive yet, hopefully soon. But if I was ever in a situation where like, you know, my car breaks down or something like that, I wouldn't know like who to call. I could probably just call my dad up and be like, what do I do? But just general education around that. I'd also say more education around, you know, because I feel like a lot of young people have like this fire in them and they're passionate about issues, whether like anything though, like whether it be like about consent reform or like whether it be around, you know, climate change or just generally like being heard by politicians. It could be about anything, but like I feel as though like there needs to be more education about ways to actually go about that, because, you know, protesting is one, but also like, you know, other means such as like, you know, meeting up with your MPs, actually, you know, getting petitions together, like Chanel Contos, who did the petition around, you know, changing our consent laws and, you know, sexual assault. But I think that that could also be taught a lot better, because I think it would equip young people to actually recognize that they're powerful enough to actually make a change. And they're, you know, the whole space around, you know, change and advocacy and politics in general isn't something that's exclusive to adults only. And, you know, while I'm 18 now, like I still feel like I'm 17 or 16. Like it doesn't really make much of a difference. But when I was like 16, 17, like, you know, I wasn't able to vote. I felt as though it was like, even politics in general, it was very much like, oh, like, you know, you have your university student like politics, and then you have like, you know, adults who are involved in that space. But it just didn't feel as though there was space for, you know, me as a young person to actually go out there and create change myself. So I think that's another thing that should be taught.
Oh, I love that. I think young people wildly underestimate the footprint they can leave. Even like with this podcast, like we've reached so many people with a podcast, which is just some random dude who started a podcast, right? And started putting out online and stuff. It's nothing special. Like anyone else could have done that. And I agree. I think this generation is so passionate about a lot of environmental issues. I think more so than any other generation, which is very exciting. I have my, you know, I think there's a lot of downsides to Gen Z, but I do think there's a lot of strengths as well. You know, they are very environmentally aware. They are very politically aware. They want to make change. They want to help. They want to bring a bit more equality into the world, rather than, you know, we don't want to have people with billions and people with nothing. Like we want to kind of try to close that gap of inequality, which is really exciting. And I think that as we, I guess, and millennials start to enter into politics, that we might see a bit of change, because there's very much like an old white man feeling in Australia right now. You know, even though there's a lot of women in politics, but there's very much a, you know, 45 plus, usually middle-aged men who are doing a lot of the decision making. And I think we're getting sick of it. It's just nothing seems to be happening. We're a bit of a joke in climate change right now. Australia's a laughingstock, which is insane. You know, we have more sun than like any other country. We could be doing solar power and doing all this cool stuff, but we don't. And so, yeah, I do think young people have so much they could do. And I think you made a good point. Like if you just, it's not clear, but if you want it enough, you can email, you can Google, you can find ways to do it similar to like how you have.
Yeah. And I definitely agree with you in terms of like, you know, who our politicians are today. I think that a lot of the time, you know, we look at our leaders and we particularly look at the culture that's there. And I think it can be scary, like particularly as a woman and everything that's happened over, you know, the past year. You know, it doesn't seem like a particularly inviting environment to enter into or workplace. You know, and, you know, for women, for people of color, for, you know, people with disabilities, it doesn't seem inclusive, and it seems though it is very dominated by, you know, old white men.
Who probably got most of their standing in a time where the world was a lot less equal. So like they leveraged the fact, you know, I think, you know, look, we don't have equality, but it's a lot better than it was 20 years ago. And so a lot of these people got into power because they were male, white, and they managed to leverage that when they were, you know, in their 20s back in 1980 or whatever. And they're still in, like, Joe Biden's like, I think he's pushing 80. Like, that's insane. I think it's too old to be running.
So old.
Like, how could he have any awareness of what young people, or like, it's just insane to me. And Trump was like 75 or something. Like, it's crazy. Like, I do think we need to be getting young people out there more. And so hopefully all the listeners of this podcast can kind of that type of people. That can kind of do that. I'd love to see more young people in politics. Yeah. I mean, I don't really know much about politics. That's something else I think we should be learning in school. Just not any sides, just the fundamentals of politics. Like, how does it work? There's 50 seats or something. There's different points. It's like, I couldn't tell you. You probably know more than me. I don't know much about politics at all. Because it's just like, I never learnt it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I think, you have that one trip to Canberra in year 6.
Yeah.
And that's about it. And then afterwards, like, unless you do something like legal studies in year 11 and 12, you don't learn about it. And I actually think, we should be learning about how the system works, how people get elected. At the same time, like, I think we should also be informed about like the different policies and stances of different parties, because a lot of the time, particularly in year 11 and 12, you're almost of voting age, or perhaps, a lot of people do turn 18 in year 12 as well. So I think like being aware, and I guess it's a bit difficult because you'd have to do it like objectively. You don't want to like skew one particular way.
It has to be completely objective. Here's how it works. You don't want to skew them at all.
Yeah. And just like present, which I mean is very difficult. So a lot of thought would have to go into, but just present like, what each party stands for, what, where they want to see the country go, who's who like within the party in terms of like, ministers and whatnot. And I think that would be quite, I think it would be very, very helpful. And I think on top of that as well, like learning about who your local MP is as well. So for instance, when I started that like UNICEF program, like we were, 10 young people sitting in the room being trained about, advocacy and like politics. And, he asked us like, who's your local MP? Do you know? And I think 2 of us like knew who our own local MP was. And, it's crazy because it's not something you think about. And I don't think it's of, massive relevance to a lot of young people. But I think particularly, as you start to come towards the end of high school, I think it's just something good to be aware of, particularly if, you do have issues that you feel passionate about, because, that's essentially the person you can go to. Whether that will make a lot of change, probably not. But I mean, it's still just a good thing to be aware of and know how everything works, because, if you're aware of that, you'll know how the system works. But on top of that, you'll also see if there's anything that you think that should change, and like learn about what you can actually do to make that change. Yeah.
And imagine if you had 30 young people email and their local MP with a problem that's happening. I'm pretty sure that would get their attention.
Yeah.
Like, don't underestimate the power you could have.
Yeah.
We're seeing on TikTok with like cancel culture.
Yeah.
Like someone says N-word and they get flooded. Their college gets flooded with like tens of thousands of emails. That's one side of it. Yeah. But if you email your MP with a different problem you want to solve or something, you get 30 people.
Action can be,
you put it on social media, on a Facebook group or something. I'm sure you could get 30 people to do it. There's a lot. They'll definitely see that.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, okay, this is clearly an issue that we want to deal with. Because I think a lot of people want to help young people and they want to get involved. They're just not too sure how as well. There's just a massive generational disconnect. I think the language, like the way young people speak versus older people, with like, very as stupid as it sounds, like memes and TikTok, and like it's created a whole different culture, almost a different world and language that young people use. Yeah. And the older generations don't really understand it, which is very, I guess, created quite a disconnect.
Yeah. What's been interesting is like, so through that UNICEF program, I've met with young people who have said exactly what you've said. There's a lot of disconnect. They're not really listening to us. But then meeting with politicians, a lot of them have actually come back to me and been like, how do I connect with young people in my electorate? Like that young people aren't the ones going into their offices every day and speaking to them. But, so my advice has been varied, but sometimes, I've been like, create a TikTok. Like that's where young people are at the moment. And if you do that, that's another way that you can actually connect with them. And, because, with politicians, you have to think about like what's in it for them, and like that will help them build their voter base. So, I was like, that's where young people are at the moment. And they were like, oh, like I'm posting on Facebook. And I was like, nobody uses Facebook anymore. Like
they just don't get it. Like, so my roommate and a good friend of mine, he runs a TikTok marketing agency, and they work with clients who want to get in TikTok, and they just don't get it. These companies, they're like, oh, can we change this? Can we change this? No, you just need to post it. What if we need to do something like this? It humanizes their brand and them as a person so much for young people. If you're on TikTok, just by being on TikTok, it's going to be like, young people don't know much about politics. So it's like, well, this is a person I've been seeing on TikTok. He seems pretty cool. She seems pretty cool. I guess I'll vote for them or something. I don't know, but I agree. I think it's a small amount of work to get on the platform and start putting out content. And I've seen a few people getting on the platform that are doing quite a good job. that's a really easy, practical way for them to start relating to younger people.
Yeah, definitely. And I also said like, I have a friend who works for Jackie Lambie, and, we had a meeting and discussing like what we can do to, build up, her platform. And, I remember being on TikTok and, she gave a really, really powerful speech about university fees increasing. And I remember seeing that video and it had thousands of views, like thousands of likes. And it was really going off. And I was like, okay, why is this video going off? Why is it so popular? And it was because, she was talking about an issue that a lot of young people resonate with. So if we had more politicians, doing that, actually talking about, issues that we care about, because I'm sure a lot of people, if you do go to university, you probably wouldn't be a fan of the fee hikes in the humanities. So yeah, I think that they need to be much more connected with us, but they also need to speak about, things that we care about. Because like, a lot of, some of the stuff they just go on and on about, like nobody really knows or like.
Yeah. And I think it will change as people get into politics and everything. But I mean, look at like Jacinda Ardern, who runs New Zealand. Like I think she's almost 40. She got an office at 35. Yeah. It's like there is strength in being younger. It gives you a different look at the world. You understand the other problems, you understand the issues and stuff. So you kind of mentioned we spoke about a few stuff that you kind of wish you learned at school. How did you get this job? So how did you get this job? Was it because you're doing all this leadership stuff in school? Like how did you land a job straight out of high school in the degree, I guess, within the field that you want to study?
So a lot of it was actually kind of preparing myself before I actually started university in the first place. So, I knew that, okay, if I want to get into something when I start uni, like I need to have a good resume. And so what I did was I first did my resume. I used Canva and it made it look really cool and like modern. And so I used that and I put basically like every little like volunteer thing I had done, because, you haven't really done too much at the age of like 18.
Of course, yeah.
So I just put like everything that I had done on there, like all my like previous jobs. I never worked in anything like law related previously. I just worked at like, I think a local cafe, and then just a local cafe. So that was basically it. So I put all my volunteer experience there. I put any extracurriculars I did, any like competitions I did through like public speaking and debating. And like this could go for anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be like if you do sport or something like that, you can include that on there as well. Then once I had, that all set up and ready to go, I started applying for jobs. So I actually applied for a job before I actually started my degree, which I knew I was absolutely not qualified for at all. But I was just like, I'm just going to go in there, see how I like speak to them, introduce myself and just see how I go. And it was like a really small criminal law firm. And I got in there and like I knew that the application said that I had to have had my license and that I had to have started my law degree, and I didn't have either of those. So, on one hand, I might have kind of just like, messed around a little bit, but at the same time, it was actually quite helpful because I learned about, the types of questions they asked me. I got to introduce myself to like the partner. I got to, speak to him. And like, as I said, I put every little thing I had done on my resume. So because of that, he like noticed, oh, look, like, you've done this for like Triple J, because like I had spoken to him about something last year, and he was like, and we started talking about that for like 20 minutes, and he was like, look, like you don't have your license now, you don't have
anything really,
anything at all, but at least you've made that connection, and you can go back there in the future if you decide you want to explore criminal law. And then it was in my first term that I went for my second interview, which is at the personal injury law firm. And, I walked in there, I was like very, very nervous. But, I kind of had that experience from the previous interview that I could use in this one. So what was interesting in that interview, it went like any other interview. It lasted for about an hour, which I was quite surprised by. But I had put like horse riding experience, like from volunteer work that I did in like early high school on my resume. And like, what do you know, like the partner that I was speaking to had an interest in this. And so we sat there for like 20 minutes talking about this, and we really got to connect and like, have a good discussion about it, and like, what I did when I was at, I was volunteering at Sydney Equestrian Centre, like what I did, like what I, how I like took kids for pony rides and whatnot. And it was completely random, but I think
it's not even relevant to law.
Yeah, it's not relevant at all.
That's what like people like themselves.
Yeah.
That is a really powerful quote when it comes to communication. People like themselves. What this means is like when you go in for a job like this, everyone who's qualified, they don't care if you got a HD or if you got a high mark or whatever. You've got your degree, that's it. That gets you into the job interview. Then they want to see, do you fit within the team? what's your relationship with them like? And if you're talking about equestrian and horses for 20 minutes, that might seem really stupid, but then that's who she wants to work with.
Yeah.
She wants to employ someone like herself. It's the same with me. Someone comes with me and they're like, oh, I love this or whatever. I'm like, oh, I love that as well. A mate of mine, he had a similar situation as you, but in finance. And he said, he took up AFL 1 year and that was on his resume. He just put it there, same as you. Yeah. And the guy's like, oh, you played AFL? He's like, yeah. Got beaten up about, got hit pretty hard, did it for a year. It wasn't for me, but I had a great time. He's like, oh, do you follow any teams? I follow one of the teams. Bang, 20 minutes of talking about AFL. And so that's where it's like, it almost seems unfair to people who are more qualified, but it's like, that's how it works.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, what you mentioned there, people don't care if you've got a HD or D. I think that particularly coming out of high school, like specifically like with law, but I'm sure it translates to other areas as well. Almost everyone's going to have a high ATAR. Pretty much everyone's going to have good marks. And so that's not really going to make you stand out in an interview. I think another thing that helped with that interview at the personal injury firm was that even though my experience wasn't, I guess, the most relevant to law, there was still an element of like, building relationships with clients and whatnot. And so, you need to kind of pick out the skills that will translate from your previous experience to what you're going into now. Yeah. So I was, explaining like, oh, what would I bring to this role? I would use those client experiences and, building relationships with people that, come into the cafe or come into, I worked at Age for a while as well, building relationships with people, so they come back into stores, so they come back into the cafe. And I use that to then translate over to clients at the firm.
Yeah. And you can find links between anything you've done. If you worked in hospitality, you can be like, well, in hospitality, it built up a lot of mental resilience because I had to deal with customers. I was customer facing, like whatever it is, you can find links to what you're doing, establish those links. And if you say them succinctly, your confidence will go a long way. They'll be like, man, this person really knows what they're talking about. Yeah. Again, the next person in the room could be way more qualified and a way better fit, but they don't communicate as well. They're not as good at interviewing. And that's why it's like, if you're not good at interviewing, that needs to be a huge priority for you. Because look at you. You did one interview. The only reason you didn't really get it was because you weren't practicing. And then the second one you got. Like, that's not a coincidence. That's not luck. Maybe there's a bit of luck involved, but you clearly prepared and you were good at communicating.
Yeah, I think, another thing I would add would be like the way we go about like job searching nowadays. I think, at least, my peers and I, we typically go for like things like, go to Seek, go to Indeed or whatever. Sometimes, there's things such as LinkedIn and Glassdoor, which we use to like, look for jobs. But at the same time, I think up until recently, I've like underestimated the power of actually like, first of all, using networking connections, but on top of that as well, cold emailing. That's actually how I got my next job, which I'll be starting in December as a litigation paralegal. Yeah. So I literally found this company that was really cool. I wanted to work for it really badly. And I sent like the managing partner this email basically explaining to him, like, this is who I am. This is why I want to work for you, and emphasize throughout the whole email, like, what I can bring to the role, because, you need to think about what's in it for them as
that's always the biggest mistake. They go, I want to work for you. I want to work for you. They don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. It might hurt you, but they don't care. Yeah. What are you gonna give them? I'll sweep the floors. I'll clean up after you. Yeah. Like, you might have to be a coffee bitch. That's how you got to climb the ladder, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the next step I would even say to people is do a video. Like, record a video and say, hey, my name's Daphne. I do this. I love to. I think I could provide so much value. Have you heard of Zapid Hire? They're a company. They're like a startup company, and they do, rather than like Seek.com where you play a resume, you do video resumes. And so you answer all the questions through video, so you can get your personality and your energy across. And it's way easier for employees to understand who you are. And employees are hiring people without doing interviews, because the video questions get enough of your personality across. And like, you know what? She's awesome. He's awesome. I'm just going to hire them. And I'll hire them through the platform. And it's free as well. Like, that's it's awesome. Super awesome. So yeah, definitely check out Zapid Hire. I'll plug them there. Yeah. But that's a great way of, like, there's a lot of other things outside of Seek.com.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I'm a big fan of cold email, or just putting yourself out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not going to say like, you're going to do it once and automatically get the job. Like, I think I had to do it to like 2 or 3 places. And then this one just happened to come back to me and was like, okay, like come in for an interview. Like, we want to talk to you, like introduce ourselves, get to know you. And like, I think, that cold email was something that I only recently tried, and it was something that just worked quite well. I think on top of that as well, like particularly in my email and going into that interview, like knowing the company well and knowing, you know, everything they do was something that I think impressed him, because, you know, I knew that they had their own podcast. I knew that they, you know, had this thing called the Soapbox, where they continuously, you know, spoke about social justice issues and wrote articles that they uploaded. I knew the way that their fees worked and why I wanted to work with the firm. So actually, like, doing your research beforehand, I think can come off as quite impressive to
100%.
An employer.
I would say, I mean, if you haven't done your research, it's like, not only is it's impressive if you have, but if you haven't, it's very not impressive. Like, they'll just be like, far out, why is this guy even here? Or like, why is she even here? She clearly hasn't done any research about the company, and it doesn't take long. Like, what you could do quite a bit of research in 10 minutes, but if you give yourself an hour, 2 hours, half a day to research, like, you'll know everything about them.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that as well, like, if you cold email, you're not necessarily up against, you know, the other 10 candidates that have applied through the same Seek ad.
And the best reason, and what I love is finding internships or job opportunities that don't exist. And so because everyone's going to see a Seek ad and they're going to go, 50 people are going to apply for that. But you want to find internship programs that don't exist. So you'll be like, hey, I love what this company is about. I love how you guys are more about giving back. You're not focused on money. I want to be a part of that. I'm currently studying my degree. I think I'd be a great fit for your company. I'd be able to do this. I could help you out. I can do this. Here's some of my skills. If you have any opportunities, I'd be happy to work for free just to get in exchange for experience and a testimonial, or someone I can have as a reference or something. Like, man, that's big. And if you did that to 10 companies, you'd have to get one. It's a numbers game. Like, you did it in 3, which is actually not many. I know people have done 20, 30. You know, they put in the work.
I think that's awesome. That's actually something I wish I did in high school. I know that a lot of my friends, you know, in like for work experience or whatever, they went to like barristers' chambers and just like, you know, got coffee for people or whatever, or just went to a law firm and did, you know, some filing work. I remember during my time at UNICEF as well, I think there was like a year 10 student, I don't remember her name, but she just like cold emailed UNICEF and was like, hey, like, you know, I want to come in for a week and I just want to like help out around the office. And she was helping out with our program. She was only in year 10. And I thought that was awesome that she actually, you know, took the initiative to reach out and like come to work with us, which was, you know, something that, looking back, like, I think that would have been cool if I had ever, you know, thought about doing that at that age. Yeah,
I wish I did. I did it, but I wish I did it more. Yeah. I just did it. It was just naturally kind of maybe my parents encouraged me to do it. I was just like, my dad used to own a networking company, and so I'd go to him. I'll be like 14 years old going to these business networking events, and I'd just like meet people, and they'd be like, "Oh, you do video? You can do a video for me." And I was like, "Sure."
Yeah.
And so I was kind of doing that, but like, it's such a powerful skill. Like I mentioned before, in my the Driven Young program, or the Gap Year program that's launching. One of the challenges on the week is get 3 coffees with people you admire. So like, spend the week before organizing them, LinkedIn, email, whatever it is, find people you admire, who you want to reach out to, ask to buy them a coffee. You go out to them. Like, I've had people reach out and be like, hey, can I grab a coffee with you? I'm like, yeah, sure. And they're like, should we meet here? Because it's halfway. And I'm like, seriously? You want to meet me? Like, I just went from walking down the road to the cafe for, 20 minutes with you to a 45-minute round trip, just in the car. 20-minute drive there and then 30-minute coffee there, and it's half my day's gone. It's like, you want to make it as easy for them as possible. Like, every time I reach out to someone, I go to them. You pay for their coffee. It's just, and this is what I mean. Like, hearing everything you've done, I think a lot of people will be like, oh, you're lucky you got this job. And it's like, well,
it's not luck.
I'm sure there's some luck involved, but like, also I email lots of people. I put myself out there. I strategize on how to do my resume. There's a lot of work into every kind of aspect of what you've done. And I think it's important for people to understand.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned networking. I think that is really underestimated, particularly like, it wasn't really something I was thinking about at all until I actually, started getting involved with UNICEF and things like that. And it was when, we had to sit down with a CEO and who was talking to us and was telling us about, this guy who kept on emailing, who was really keen on working with the company. And then he like kept asking like, do you want to have a coffee with me, blah, blah, blah. And he ended up, scoring a job and getting a job through him.
Yeah.
And, that's something that, it's quite like, I think it can be a bit nerve wracking to reach out
100%,
and being like,
of course.
And so I think, while that's quite a bold thing to do, there are also other ways to go about it rather than also like asking for coffee. I think that's awesome. But I also think like, for instance, like I remember, I worked with someone, I knew someone from UNICEF, right? And he his wife is a lawyer and she works in a law firm, and he reached out to me this year, like after having a conversation about, you know, what I was doing and what I was up to the next year. And he was like, oh, she's looking for a clerk. Like, would you be interested in, you know, working for her, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh, you know, I'm not interested at the moment, but I have some people I can put in touch as well. So I think, you know, it's the power of it is just, it's so powerful because, you know, even if you're not that immediate connection, you can also pass on people that you know. And I think that actually, you know, meeting with people, then, you know, afterwards, you know, sending them a message on LinkedIn or connecting with them or being like, you know, thanks for today, I found it really insightful. Like that opens up, you know, the possibility of building that relationship and developing that relationship further as well. It's
getting the foot in the door, then following up. And you got to follow up a lot. Yeah. Like you want to follow up. They might not read 2 or 3 emails, keep following up. Yeah. It's not like the dating world. That's something I realized. Like when you're in the dating world, if I message a girl and she sees me, it's like maybe you might message one more. And if she sees you again, then it's like, okay, clearly this is not going anywhere. But in the business world, man, you send 5, 6 emails because like people are busy. It goes down to the bottom. And then I've had people be like, hey, Brian, thanks so much for following up. I've done it as well. I've had people send me like 4 or 5 emails. I'm like, dude, thanks so much. Sorry I didn't get to the other ones. Let's have a chat. And it's like, that's the business world. Yeah. And, you know, getting coffees, whatever it is, rather than getting coffee, maybe you go, hey, I noticed that you run this event every Wednesday fortnight. I'd love to come and help you set it up. Yeah. No, who's going to say no to that? Who's going to be like, hey, I'll come help I'll lift all the chairs for you. I'll set everything up. And it's like, bang, now your foot's in the door. You've built a small connection with them. He's going to say, thanks so much for that. You know, how can I help you? Most successful people will naturally say, how can I help you? And if you're young, people want to help young people. I'm sure you've already discovered that. Like I'm 23 years old and I feel like the window has closed or is closing for me. I can still kind of see it. But man, when you're 18, when you're 17, 16, 15, whatever, man, when a 15-year-old reaches out to you, no one says no because you're 15. When a 23-year-old reaches out to you, less so. Exactly. So take advantage of your youth.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, you know, I even noticed I was doing a project in year 12 and I was like, I got a bit lazy and I was like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to go straight to the academics. So it was like for history extension. And so I literally cold emailed a bunch of university, you know, media commentators, professors and whatnot. And I was like, hey, I'm an 18-year-old student. Like I have a few questions, and I interviewed them and like used them as sources for my project. And I remember having the discussion with my teacher at the time and she was like, trust me, like they will say yes because you're a kid. And if you right there, oh, like I look up to you so much. Like you're just amazing. I want to be like you when I grow up. Like it's like flattering to hear. So they'll be like, you know,
rubs the ego.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And you do want to do that. You want to rub their ego. Yeah. Like I want to be like you. It's like, and people love to teach or like pass on their knowledge, like mentor. It's like, oh, I've got a kid who wants to be like me and I can teach them what I've learned. Yeah. They love that. That's how I got my foot in the door. You know, with this guy when I was 18, I was working for him for like 2 years. I learned so much from him. He got to pass on a lot to me. Like that's what I mean. Like that wasn't an internship officially, but it basically was like, I consider that my university or my education, working for this guy, seeing it all practically, meeting people, networking and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I talk a lot about networking and the 1,000 doors, which is what you said before, like behind one door could be 1,000 more. So even if you meet this person, they might not be the right connection, but they know someone who is. Yeah. And if you deliver a good impact and they're impressed by you, they're going to want to help you. So when you say, you know, oh, I'm a current law student. I'm just looking to get a job in this field because I want to try it out. Oh, I know someone I can connect you with. Yeah. And bang, now you've got that warm intro. Yeah. So you never know. If you live life open-minded like that, so much can happen.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, awesome, Daphne. This has been a great episode. Thank you so much for coming on. Before I wrap up, I have one final question. And you are 18 years old, so it's an interesting question. But my advice usually is, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self? But you're 18. So let's just say, what advice would you give to younger people or like even other 18-year-olds?
Okay. So younger people, other 18-year-olds. Okay. So I guess the one piece of advice I would give would be to never underestimate yourself and always be on the lookout for new opportunities, whether that be, you know, like we've discussed, through networking, through reaching out to people, to finding someone who you want to be like. You know, I did that myself as well. I found, you know, this young woman, Yasmin Poole, she was absolutely amazing. I saw everything she was doing and I was like, I want to be like that when I grow up. So literally look everywhere for any opportunities that you can find. Look for people that you want to be like when you grow up. And try and, you know, I guess in a sense, follow in their footsteps, but at the same time, never lose track of where your own path is going.
Wow. Great advice. Love it so much. And I couldn't agree more. You got to put yourself out there. You know, I think most people look at people and go, oh, they're more extroverted than me. They're just naturally good at it.
Yeah.
Maybe, but what kind of mindset is that?
Yeah.
It's like, put yourself out there. I know it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for everyone. I'm sure it's uncomfortable for you. It's not like you're like, yeah, I love cold emailing people. No, it's uncomfortable. But you got to do it if you want to stand out, especially when it comes to law. Like, that's a very competitive degree in Australia. So I think you're crushing it. If anyone wants to reach out to you and ask you any questions or follow you online, where's the best place to go?
Best place is probably Instagram.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Instagram or LinkedIn or something.
Yeah, Instagram or LinkedIn.
And I'll put all the links below. But otherwise, Daphne, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.